Hi friends, Carl here with another edition of Calm Survival in what's turned into part 2 on our little tutorial on knife blades and shapes. First off, I just want to reference that in the last episode we talked about the belly and this curve here, but I didn't reference what happens if you have a concave curve in the blade in another location. Now, in some cases, it will be an advantage and it will be a design feature. If you're a novice, especially to sharpening, it can be something that is just more difficult to deal with. So in general, it's one of those things that you just have to be aware of so that if it's something you don't need, you can avoid and just make your life simpler later. Okay? Now, when we move on to discussing another aspect of blade shapes, you'll often hear people refer to the profile. Now, often the profile is simply the shape from the spine to the edge, but it can also refer to the shape from the handle to the tip. So in this case, we have a full flat grind. So the taper from the spine begins at the spine and comes all the way down towards the edge. Then we have our final edge bevel, our final edge surface right near the edge. But we also have a distal taper. So from the handle to the tip, it tapers the entire way. Now what that leaves us with is a nice fine tip, a nice shallow angle, so that if we're cutting through something, the force we need is based entirely on how far apart we're pushing the two sides. So if we use a thin wedge, we can push a lot deeper before we hit that point. If we use a wide wedge, we need a lot more force. The wide wedge will be obviously stronger because there's more material involved, but that's not something that I find super valuable. I would rather save the weight, so that's why in this case, we've got a taper in this direction. Now, as far as this height, because of geometry and angles, this nice shallow angle to get a thickness that provides us with a reasonable amount of strength does mean that we need this much height. In comparison, we have another knife that is just a little bit thinner. They're fairly close, but we can see how much less height is needed because in this knife, the bevel starts down near the edge. All compromises, all things to consider. Now, this knife, with its manufactured blunt end, I didn't break this one, is referred to as a Scandi or Scandinavian grind. And that's a smaller bevel starting, somewhere, a quarter or a third of the way towards the edge, and ground straight down to the edge. In this case, it is what is referred to as a zero edge, so there is no extra bevel. It's just one bevel all the way down. It doesn't have to be. So in all of these things, you can quickly see how you can have 3 or 4 combinations of descriptors all sort of informing each other. There's no really hard and fast rules. In this knife, we have what is sometimes referred to as a high saber grind. So it starts down from the spine, and this one is also a hollow ground blade. And then it has its final bevel down right down at the edge. Now, a hollow grind basically removes, because it's an arc, removes more material through the middle, and the tangent basically of the curve is if we had a wheel, the tangent is going to be down near the edge. So it's not a dished out section and then thicker down at the bottom. It's just cut in and then down. So it reduces some weight because we get to a thinner area more quickly, It provides a nice thin wedge. The compromise is once we get up to here, we still get back to this thickness. And in this case, it's quite stout. Because this is a hunting knife, very typically, the slicing action doesn't need to go very, very deep. Whereas something like this Scandi grind, if we were pushing this through some wood, we have a nice, stout, thick wedge, and that's going to help push that wood apart. If we made this even thicker, then it's going to provide even more of that action to, say, if we're using it to split wood, the wider the wedge, the more quickly it's going to push that wood apart. So these are all compromises. These are all part of what we're looking at. The next thing to consider is how the blade and the tang meet. So in this case, we can actually see it. We can see that thickness. Okay. This tang could be tapered as well, but that would be an additional cost because then these would have to match the tang. In this case, it isn't, but that would, again, reduce some weight. But we can see that all of these meeting areas are all nice and rounded. If we have 90-degree corners, those are going to cause what are referred to as stress risers. So if there's any flexion that's going to happen, anywhere where there's a sharp edge or a sharp angle is going to cause a potential or force is going to be concentrated. Now in this case, these are all quite rounded out. But on this knife, we can't tell if this could very well be just a 90-degree up here and could be a much thinner bar coming back. I don't particularly know, but it's something that is possible. Now in this case, because of its more likely uses, it's not going to be as important. This one being more of a knife designed to be beat on, it is more of a concern for us. In this case, the tang only comes back to about here on this one. But because this is an injection molding over the top, because it's very tight, this isn't going to loosen up over time until it breaks off. And also, this is very, very cheap. So this is far closer to the utility knife end of the spectrum than this one. Okay. And so it's just about looking at those compromises. Every time a grinder touches any one of these things, that costs more money. So where did the manufacturer put the money? If they put the money into a bunch of crazy looking saw teeth or a paint job with skulls on it or anything like that that's purely aesthetic, or if when you look at it, the grind doesn't make any sense. Okay. On this, we can see that they've left this plain, they've left this full thickness, and then very drastically tapered it out. Well, that means that we've got a very thin, nice, fine edge out here. We've got a tougher section up here, but we can also see that it is going to be very easy to sharpen because it's one smooth transition. And then all of a sudden, military utility knife makes a lot of sense. There's a lot of utility things. There's a lot of wilderness knives that take a lot of their features from older style bayonets and combat knives. But are those things that you really need? Personally, I don't think so. So they're just going to add to the cost, and they're not going to make for as good of a knife for most of the uses that you're probably going to need it for. And then lastly, some of the consideration is going to come to balance and size. As we look at the different knives, you can see how, to a degree, the handle size and the blade size are going to kind of match each other and balance each other, but not always. And so knowing whether or not the handle is big enough and whether or not it's got a useful shape for you, for what you need, is going to be very beneficial. Now, in this case, we can see that because it's got this front little handguard, same with this one, not very good cutting board knives. Same with this one. Whereas this one, there's a little bit more room. Again, all of these things are part of the grand number of compromises that are made, and there is so many hundreds and hundreds of different designs, different little tweaks, different little variations, that if you don't see something that you like, it's pretty likely that you can search up something more useful for you. But also, as you can see, in all of that, it can be very overwhelming and there can be a lot of choice. So if you want to narrow things down, pick your price point, make sure that you see where you think that money has been spent, find a manufacturer that has some reputation, and you're probably going to do just fine. All right. That hopefully covers that for now. I'm Carl. This is Comm Survival. We'll catch you guys next time.